Hi, Peter Charles here, Folk to Fly Fishing, and welcome to my second video on the concept of strategic sloppiness. Let me clarify what I'm talking about first. I'm talking about being deliberately sloppy or not fashionable to get a fly that actually fishes better. I'm not just talking about just being sloppy and hoping for the best. It's actually being very, very conscious in how we're being sloppy. For example, creating a fly with a very large head. You know, small heads are supposed to be the way to tie, but you know, there is fishing advantages for having a large head. And I want to talk about a problem that we all suffer from, we've all experienced. So it's easy to see when fishing for dry flies. Your dry fly is bouncing along and a fish comes up, almost looks like it's about to take it, turns and swirls, and you just see the swirl on top of the water. It's called a refusal. We see that with dries all the time, but we don't realize it's also happening to our subsurface flies as well. If we're drifting a nymph, swinging a wet, or stripping a streamer, fish will come up behind to take a look and dive away and lose interest. And you know, we cannot perceive the world like the fish do, so it's hard for us to understand why the fish did not take the fly, especially when that one took it and that one didn't, or that one didn't take it this morning but took it this afternoon. You know, there are things that are going on in that picture where we can't really hope to understand. So what I'm going to talk about really doesn't have a lot of empirical evidence to back it up beyond anecdotal evidence that says, you know, the more a fly is chewed on, the better it fishes, and that's often true. I think we've all experienced that. The pristine fly catches fish, but the one that's been chewed on catches fish even better. You know, I can think of the featherwing streamers I fished in Maine. After I had a couple of fish hit a gray ghost, after that, man, that thing was really effective. So what was going on? Well, I have a feeling that part of the problem is that our flies are too quiet when they come through the water. Now, think of how a fish senses the world. It can see our flies, it can smell our flies, it can perhaps hear our flies, especially when they land in the water when we've cast them. But through the lateral line, it also feels our flies, the movement of our flies through the water. Now, I think we have somewhat similar sense. If you've had a bug land on your forearm, it hits a hair, you feel that, now you know there's a bug on your arm. You can feel the wind blowing through the hairs on your arm. So we sort of have that in the way we can feel things through our hair. But you know, for fish, it's more pronounced. They can feel vibrations in the water. Now, you think when a bait fish is swimming, every stroke of the tail is creating this little tiny thump of water, a few little vortices. There's vortices coming off of its fins. You know, you've got the water flowing over its scales. So there are little vortices, tiny vortices, and these little thumps going on all the time, which I'm sure at close range, a fish probably, a predator can probably perceive through its lateral line. Not at any kind of distance, but getting close. And you think of what happens when a fish refuses our streamer. The fish sees our streamer, goes heading for it with the intent to eat it, and the last second something turns it off and veers away. It could be the smell of the glue we used, or the smell of the materials we used. It could also be the fact that it's not sounding. This doesn't feel like a bait fish because it's quiet. Now, when you get into conventional tackle, you get stuff like this. This is a squad minnow jerkbait. You can hear it. There's balls inside, and this thing goes through the water, flicking from side to side, making a lot of thumping noises. You get soft plastic swim baits, and the tail on that is going to thump when it comes through the water. You get a streamer like this, there's no noise. It's quiet. So with my streamers, I tend to do a couple of things differently than tradition. One is the heads on them are quite large, and that head will push water aside. So instead of it flowing straight down the fly, it now gets pushed aside, creating tiny vortices that are going to kick the materials around. And secondly, my materials are kind of rough. As you can see, that one's got a yarn body, and this is my black-nosed day swimmer, by the way, and it has all this marabou. So that is going to create some tiny turbulence through the water. So when a fish comes up behind this fly is actually making a little, tiny little bit of vibration. Not a whole lot, but it's doing something. It's not coming through the water super clean. So my point is that when we tie streamers with these tiny heads and we're doing everything, our bodies are perfectly smooth, the wings are perfectly laid out, everything is beautiful, those flies go through the water so cleanly, they're probably not giving up much of a vibration at all. And it's only when they get chewed on by a few fish and they get roughed up, then they start creating that turbulence. So when they swing through the water, then the fish start feeling them. And my Weimer series, because of this construction, also will flutter in the water. You know, you get like a flag flapping. Well, you'll get that with this type of construction. You get a lot of flapping going on. And that also creates turbulence and creates something the fish can feel. So I think when the fish come up behind a fly like this, they feel something. Their lateral line says that's alive. Whereas if you're coming up behind a fly that is very slick, very smooth, they're probably not getting as much feeling, and maybe they start to doubt that it's alive and they turn away. Now, not every fish turns away from a pristine fly, obviously, and nobody would tie pristine flies if that was true. But I think what you're doing is, if you have a fly that does give off some vibration, you're upping your odds. And that's kind of my philosophy in fly tying and fishing, is to reduce the number of things that might cause a fish to turn away from a fly. So avoid stinky materials, stinky glues. Have a fly that vibrates or gives off some kind of motion. You know, a fly that's visually good. All the things that, you know, might appeal to a fish, and if you miss one of them or do something wrong, you can end up with no fish, which has happened to me when I used a very, very stinky nail polish for a head cement, put the flies away in a box, went to fish them a month later in Cape Cod, and now got a sniff on them for good reason. I opened the box, oh, it stank. I used one of my friend's flies, immediately catching fish. So went back to the cottage, tied up a new batch, didn't use nail polish, bingo, I caught fish on the same type of fly, one with stink and one without stink. So the fact of the matter is, fish will turn away from a fly if there's something not right. And one of the things that I feel is important is that your flies have got to give off these little microscopic vortices and vibrations. So when the fish gets close, it can pick those up with its lateral line, and it thinks that's alive, and it'll hit it. So give that some thought. Big heads, rough finishes, those things can make a difference between whether you get a fish that comes up and turns away and a fish that comes up and eats your fly. Cheers.